Hey everyone, we are fresh off of playing an hour of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So fresh, in fact, we're not even going to wait for any new video because it sounds like the only video they're going to have ready for us is going to be CG trailer,
Right.
and not the actual gameplay that we played. So we figured let's just talk about what we played, yeah, they had a very small like PowerPoint presentation before we played the game. They didn't even show us what the game looked like.
No.
It was like, here's some PowerPoints, here's CG trailer. But I think that one thing that they did kind of communicate here is that like Lara Croft is now like full out Predator.
Right.
Like even like those parts of the trailer like reminded me of scenes from Predator the movie. Like there's all these like guerrilla soldiers wandering through the jungle, and Lara Croft is just like picking them off one by one. So she's at full on Predator mode.
They mentioned the word confident, but they're also strongly selling vicious, I think a little bit more cynical, a lot more, not jaded. I don't think she's jaded, but I'm going to do this and I'll deal with the repercussions a little bit later.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more headstrong than I remember seeing her in the past two games. So.
Yeah, and I don't think I'd ever... Like, I think this is the first time where it's, like, clicked in my head that, like, this is an origin story trilogy. Like, I never,
Right.
like, had that concept before. It's, like, it would just felt like this weird, like, repetitive thing that they were doing. It's, like, the second game is, like, and you know, and she's becoming the Tomb Raider. I'm like, what? And now the third game, she's becoming the Tomb Raider. I'm like, we've done this twice now.
We're not the Tomb Raider yet? What have we been doing?
But, yeah, that's still a thing. Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit more. But the idea of saving the world from this Mayan apocalypse is basically the setup.
Yeah, that is the setup. That's correct. I think the interesting thing about it is saving the world from this Mayan apocalypse that she triggered.
Yeah, they don't tell us that beforehand, but yeah, that's
Right.
in the gameplay. We end up getting there.
And that's an element, when we don't have to get into it right now, but that is an element that I want to talk about where Lara does some really immediately bad things and has to own up to them, and people aren't necessarily willing to go on board with this crazy adventure. They're like, hey, we've got people here we need to take care of. Like, I don't know if your quest is going to lead in something fruitful, so let's not go do that. And I like that. I like that. To me is a little bit more interesting than what I remember of playing of Rise of the Tomb Raider, because I went to an event for that as well, and I walked away feeling like, the villains kind of feel cartoony. I'm not really buying what they're selling. Everything feels a little bit overdone. But here, there was definitely immediate conflict between Lara and everybody else, and that she's not this faultless heroine. And
Yeah.
I liked that. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, and I think also speaking to that, if you remember, Jonah is this kind of big, like Maori kind of guy.
Right.
You know, he's still there assisting Lara, and there's this point near the end of the demo where, you know, she has this view that she started this apocalypse, but he's like, you're just like self-centered. You don't know that you
Exactly.
having this. This could be coincidence, you know. But it's, you know, it seems to line up. It seems that like she probably did. But one thing I think is interesting is going back to where the demo starts. It's Cozumel, Mexico, and the past two Tomb Raider games. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've been in like a populated city like that before. Like,
No.
There's like people partying all over the place. There's like ice cream vendors. There's people you can talk to. It's the Day of the Dead.
Yeah, to my origin story Tomb Raider experience, I played through the 2013 game when it came out from start to finish, and then I went to an Xbox event for Rise of the Tomb Raider, and I played 3 hours of that, and that's basically my experience. And so in that amount of time, no, I don't remember anything quite like this, and it's a really great setting out the gate. They're celebrating the Day of the Dead, and you've got all of this candlelight and all these crazy masks and lots of color, and it's kind of an interesting city immediately. Like, you want to go around, you want to kind of soak it all in, and there's a tremendous amount of detail everywhere, which I appreciated.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that you kind of get like the multiple layers of that, because you've got the big festive celebration out in the courtyard, and then you kind of move a little further into the cemetery where people are actually like paying their respects to their
Right.
family and all of that. And again, you get a little further into the back alleys, and there's just like all these street vendors selling masks and tchotchkes and things, and meanwhile you're tracking these these agents that Lara's competing with.
There's one thing I really don't like about this opening scene, and one thing I really do like is as you're kind of exploring both the party that's going on outside, and then when you get in and people are kind of paying their respects to the dead, it does a lot of the now commonly used slow walking, where you're getting information and it's like, okay, I have to hear this story stuff and you still want me to play, but I'm moving super slow and this is kind of frustrating.
Sure.
They employ that, which not a big deal, but something that I noticed. And one thing that I do like, though, is when people are paying their respects, Lara kind of awkwardly says like, "Oh, excuse me," or "Pardon," and I feel like it kind of reinforces the theme that they're setting up, where these people are trying to do this service and they're not bothering anybody, and Lara is just like, whatever, I have to get past them, and it's kind of like this awkward moment where she bumps into them and it's like, okay, time to move on to the objective, and you sort of get it drilled into your head that like, oh, maybe she is really self-centered a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think another thing too that, as you mentioned, the slow walking. One thing that you brought up in the car was that when you go up to like the little resource kits,
This is actually annoying. Yeah.
Crafting materials or whatever. There's little buckets of things that you can just grab the pickaxe and smash and get stuff out of. If somebody's talking to you on a radio or something, it like just X's that out. It's like, nope, you cannot pick up that little bit of loot. So you just kind of have to wait. You can't just like grab it and keep walking
Right.
while they talk to you on the radio, which is a little strange.
Right. It feels like it falls into this strange area where it's like, if you're going to let me move and walk around, then why don't you let me pick up things and interact with the environment? It almost feels more awkward than if they completely took control away from you. It's like, if you want me to focus on the story, then let's just focus on the story. And so I don't really like that half measure that they're doing with it. But
a lot of things kind of immediately return. And this does feel like, I mean, there may be some more prologue than this, but this does feel like it should be the beginning of the game in some form. But you right away, like you have the twin pickaxes. You have the ability to shoot the rope arrows and pull things or connect arrows to things and create zip lines. One thing that I don't remember being a thing in the past games now is and maybe I'm just not remembering. Maybe it was there, but you can rappel now. So like you're hanging from those porous walls. From that kind of space, you kind of push a shoulder button, and then you push down to lower yourself on a rope, and then you can hold a shoulder button and swing back and forth to get to a platform. So that's an interesting mechanic that kind of opens the world up in a different way.
yeah, and I feel like a lot of types of games like this where you have platforming, it tends to all feel very similar, where it's like, okay, I'm only jumping to things that are marked. Maybe there's a scuff on the wall or a yellow piece of paint, and it all feels pretty similar. But here, even in just the prologue, you're wall running, you're rappelling, you're using the pickaxe to pull yourself up. I feel like you're doing a good variety of things, and they immediately put that into the puzzle solving, which I also liked. And so there's a moment early on, right actually before a puzzle, there's a secret where you can there's two platforms, and you can just jump on one and run across and get to the puzzle. Or if you're like, wait, I think I can rappel down this, you can go down, rappel, and then stop and swing, and you can find a little bit of a secret, which I thought was a nice
and
introductory
secrets felt like
secret.
Yeah, the ones that I saw felt like they fit into the world pretty well. I got one. There's like basically a series of collectibles where you like shoot these like stone masks, these blue stone masks that are hanging from the ceiling. And those they blend in pretty well, but they still stand out like just enough to work. And then there are also like just some like Mayan carvings that you walk up to, and that kind of checks off one of those boxes. But they're not like super glowy or anything like that. One thing that they seem to be putting more of a focus on this time, and there was some of this in Rise of the Tomb Raider, but it seems to be even more now, is more exploration underwater.
Right. And during the presentation beforehand, it was something that they kind of mentioned as sort of this hype up point where it's like, hey, we're going to do a lot more underwater exploration. We're bringing that back. And they're right. It is something that is very much a part of like Tomb Raider 3 and Tomb Raider 2, going underwater, getting in the ruins and all that stuff. And it was in Rise of the Tomb Raider, even very early on in Rise of the Tomb Raider. But it definitely felt like here it's not just connecting this on-land parts to another on-land part. It's like, no, there are going to be secrets here. There are going to be a lot of collectible things here. And I was really worried about it. I think it's hard in any third-person adventure game when you say, we're going to be spending a lot of time underwater, right, for me to feel good about that. But it actually controlled really well.
Yeah.
I felt like Lara, so there's this sort of standard pace that you can go, or if you hold down a trigger, you can go much faster. And I thought you moved very, very quickly. And it wasn't cumbersome to maneuver. I felt like I could get exactly where I wanted. And something else that I appreciated is that she had a lot of breath underwater. It wasn't,
right,
oh, go a few feet and then you have to go up on this hole and breathe. Like, there is some of that, but I felt like I got enough of a leash that I wanted to explore. I wanted to find secrets, and it wasn't a pain in the butt to do so, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I definitely found some extra little side corners to get into down there. And then they had so you're going through underwater. Another thing that's really nice underwater is and it's kind of ironic because it probably isn't realistic, but it's still it's nice to look at, is just the lighting.
Yes, like
the light that's coming up from under the water to kind of show you which way the tunnels are coming from. Looks right, really, really great. When you get further into the caves, they have these sort of like big pendulum platforming puzzles.
Yeah.
Which I think is good to like just have a lot more of that in there, a lot more platforming, and there is a kind of a trade-off with there are these carts that you had to push and put weight onto the platforms to put them up to the proper height, and so there's a lot of vertical space there to play with. Mm-hmm. Even though it's like you're gonna eventually get it because that's the only way forward in that section. So I think there's one thing that this demo and this section of the game in particular kind of doesn't give you a sense of how much of openness there
right,
is. Like with Rise of the Tomb Raider, like there are very big open spaces.
Absolutely.
And this was like you've got side areas, but it's pretty funneled through to get to beginning and end of this space.
I think
avoid traps and such.
Because it was so early on and everything felt like a tutorial.
Yeah.
It's hard to praise it too much or criticize it too much without really getting a sense, because some of the things that they talked about in the presentation, we didn't see it at all. And one of the things that they were hyping up is that the jungle is going to be really important and that you're going
right,
to use the jungle and the wildlife and your environment to fight enemies, and we didn't see any of that. I got no...
Yeah, well, there's some brief jungle bits. The jungle plays into stealth for sure.
Right.
But in sort of this normal, obvious ways of like hiding in the tall grass.
Yeah.
They have a new thing where they're like walls of vines that you can hide in.
Right.
And I think my favorite thing about that is just like how muddy Lara gets.
Yes.
When she comes out of that, and she just really does, look like a maniac, a murdering maniac when she comes out and stabs some dude in the head. And one thing that they've added there with that stealth system is there's kind of like Batman vision mode kind of thing. Yes. Where you can see whether enemies have a line of sight on each other. So if somebody's marked red, somebody else can see them, and if you try to stealth kill them, you're just going to alert.
Right. Yeah, that was one of my favorite things about the demo, just a nice improvement, because I hate in games where you feel like you're in the clear and you go for the stealth kill and it's like, wait, he saw me from there? That doesn't really line up. And I appreciate that transparency, knowing like, hey, if I go in for the kill, I should be able to get away with this unless something changes on my way there. But there was really only one kind of open fight in the entire demo that we played, and roughly the hour that we played. And
one point where he's like, oh, I have guns.
Right. And the AI, even in just that one fight, left me a little bit hesitant because I would kill one of them, they would start investigating, and then I would kill another one and they would find me, and rather than act in any sort of logical way, like, oh, we're going to get behind cover or we're going to get really aggressive, we're just going to kind of dance around the open and wait for you to potshot us. And
I didn't have them go into an investigation mode, but it was very much like they didn't feel like they were getting into position or anything like that. It's
Right.
like, okay, there's sort of some cover here, and they're going to sort of stand here, and they're going to sort of come my direction. But, you know, I did die once just kind of adjusting to the controls, but otherwise it was just like, okay, like, get the assault rifle out for long range, pull the shotgun out when they get close, and there wasn't a whole lot to it. But again, it was just one basically tutorial encounter.
Right, and you always have to question, hey, were things tuned down for this demo? Is it just because this is part of the tutorial?
Yeah.
It's hard to get an accurate sense of that. But just in that one isolated instance, that was something that I noticed. Yeah, the bow is back.
Mm-hmm.
It feels good. It functions seemingly identically to past Tomb Raider games. But I think the thing that I walk away from the most with Shadow of the Tomb Raider in that hour is it's well made.
Yeah.
I think the idea of Lara realizing that she has to accept consequence for her actions could be really interesting, but it definitely felt very familiar. And that's not bad.
Right.
I think if you've enjoyed Rise of the Tomb Raider or Tomb Raider 2013, you're in for a good time. But I think, and it's a shame because nothing exists in a vacuum, especially coming out of God of War, where it does feel so reinvented and so new and so fresh. That is the most comparable thing that I've played recently to something like Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This was just like, yeah, this is what I would expect. And not disappointment, really, but also not really being blown away at the same time.
And I think, but I do think, as you're saying, like, you do see pretty clearly, like, why she feels the sense of these consequences. Because basically what happens is, you know, she takes this Mayan artifact and it begins this, like, series of apocalyptic events, and the first thing is a tsunami.
Right.
And you're trying to, like, navigate as everything is crumbling around you, and you're, like, swimming through, like supermarkets full of bodies.
Yep.
And you're jumping across all this crumbling stuff, and it's just like this very, like, kind of crazy scene as things are shifting and moving around and breaking on underneath of your feet. And there are just there's a couple of moments where she's trying to save somebody,
Right.
and they just die right in front of her, and she feels responsible for all of it.
Right.
But at the same time, there's that weird conflict with her and Jonah at the end, where it's like he wants to stick around and help people, and she's like, the only way we're really going to be able to help anyone is if we get to where the next artifact is to stop what do they name it again? I forget their name already.
The organization?
Yeah.
Trinity. Yeah.
Stop Trinity from getting the silver box that, if they combine it with the other artifact, allows them to recreate the world however they want.
I can't not associate it with the Matrix. No, but that is something that I appreciate. And thinking back to my experience with this origin story Tomb Raider, I like that they're kind of widening the scope a little bit, whereas before it really just felt like, okay, I care about Lara. Lara has to do tough things in order to survive. Now it sort of feels like, even in that tsunami situation, because multiple times they show you're like, hey, this is affecting people that you don't even know. This is really messed up. Maybe your quest isn't worth this. And I think that's what Jonah is trying to say. And I appreciate that, and I hope they keep using that in effective ways throughout the game.
It's interesting because, yeah, like you said, it's Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
And it's good, but beyond that, it's hard to say much more.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just have to continue and wait and see. But that's our first impressions.
Yeah.